Hi, everybody. Welcome to our latest installment of the Geology of series. Today, we're going to have a really informative webinar on the geology of rock climbing. This series was put together by a talented group of volunteers representing a few different organizations, the AAPG Women's Network, the Association for Women Geoscientists, and Midwest Geosciences Group. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute or so. If we could share, we have a slide that shows some icebreaker information. We can put that up on the screen, and then Carla, if you can put it in the Menti link in the chat. You can also find a link to that information in the chat. I see a lot of participants are rolling in, which is great. So we'll start with the technical portion with our awesome presenter here in just a minute or two. But as people are able to roll in, excuse me, everyone will be able to go onto this Menti poll and do some interactive information. So you can find the link either in the chat or it'll be here on the screen in a moment. There it is. You can scan that QR code with your phone and enter that code, or sorry, the QR code brings you directly there, or you can go on menti.com and enter that code, which I can't read unfortunately, but you can find both of those information in the chat box. So welcome once again. Feel free to take a minute or so to answer those questions. And once I see, it looks like our participants are starting to trail off here in terms of new
Hey,
people
Lauren, I was
joining.
just going to say, I think you're sharing your presenter slide. So,
Okay, thank you. Let me
no
see if I
worries.
can figure out how to get it to the actual slide in this setting.
Well, I'd like to, while Lauren's doing that, I'd like to once again welcome everyone. And this is the Geology of Rock Climbing, and our presenter, Lauren Heerschap of Brunton, is going to give us a lot of great information on the intersection of how geology affects rock climbing. I said this a moment ago, but this series is intended to introduce folks to both geologists and non-geologists alike of how geology affects our everyday lives in different ways. We've had some great webinars in the past on the geology of beer, geology of coffee, geology of pigments, whiskey, and now we're going into some physical activities of rock climbing. But a lot of things that we do in life are impacted by geology, and that's what this series is intended to do. So I will hand it over to Lauren and take it away.
All right, how does the slide look now? Is it the full screen?
It looks great.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right, well, I will go back to the title slide here, if I can. All right, working between two screens now. Give me a thumbs up if that worked and you all are seeing the correct title slide now.
Looks great.
Okay, great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. I'm excited to give this presentation. I've done a few renditions of this in the past, really over the last like 2 decades. But as someone who has been climbing for well over half my life and a geologist for over half my life, the two go hand in hand, and it's been a fun journey to share this type of presentation in some different contexts. Little bit of my background, and then we'll really dive into what the presentation is supposed to be all about. I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and again, almost a natural, like you almost can't come away from growing up in this setting and not climb and not also become a geologist. It's a beautiful setting. It is also where I started climbing as a teenager. This is over the Rio Grande Rift between Los Alamos and Santa Fe, New Mexico. I also, this is, I think, the first picture of me with a Brunton as a field camp student in the Black Hills of South Dakota in, gosh, year 2000. And really took to geology. I loved doing field geology. I loved teaching field geology. Got my master's in tectonic geomorphology. That's a picture of me in Taiwan, which was my field area for my master's. And after my master's, I went on and I worked for the Colorado Geological Survey for a few years and enjoyed that, but really wanted to live somewhere less crowded. Denver was not the place. And so my husband and I moved to Durango, Colorado. And that's where I, after a year of oil and gas, ended up teaching field geology. This is not a picture of Durango, Colorado. That is a semester of teaching geology and outdoor science to high schoolers in Zermatt, Switzerland. So teaching really got into my blood. I loved being able to help young budding geologists and even those who aren't going to go into geology. I really loved just working with students, helping them see the world through a geological lens. And once I started teaching at Fort Lewis College, I started teaching more and more of the field methods courses. And over time, realized that when I asked students to try to describe what they were measuring in the field, they couldn't really show me. Like, this is purposely a bad measurement. Sorry, past student. But I couldn't get students to really tell me what they were doing with their Bruntons. And one thing led to another. And one particular field session, I remember just coming up with this idea in my head that of a Brunton that would take geological measurements in a different way and twist and turn and simultaneously measure strike and dip. And then in another configuration, simultaneously measure trend and plunge. And so that really started this journey that I never really anticipated. I thought I would teach field science and teach GIS and teach intro geology classes for the rest of my career. But that idea popped into my head, and really my career took a right-hand turn. And we patented our invention, worked with Brunton to market the axis, and even moved up to Wyoming to get this item launched. And things continued to cascade and ended up working for Brunton and then having the opportunity to buy Brunton in 2021. So my husband and I are now the current owners and we like to say caretakers of the brand. And we are here we live in Lander, Wyoming, and Brunton is in Riverton, Wyoming, where it's been for over 50 years. And that's where everything is made. We make all of our transits right here in Wyoming. So that's my intro. I could go on about that whole story for an entire presentation, but that's not the point of today. Really, to get into the meat of things, it's gonna be a whirlwind. Like, again, this could be an entire textbook, but why does geology matter for climbing? That's really one of the main goals of the things that we're trying to address in this presentation today. All of these factors determine what makes a good climbing area in the first place, how we climb on that rock, like the textures we use to climb on that rock, the techniques we use, and then how we protect that climb in terms of how we safely ascend that rock without the risk of, or at least too much risk of getting hurt or worse. And so the texture and composition of the rock, the age of the rock, its aspect, its slope, its elevation, a lot of those determine how it weathers. The layers above and below a unit can affect how it is going to behave over time at the surface. Weathering and then the factors of erosion themselves obviously play a role with anything at the surface. And so this is not a complete list. Everything, geology is obviously what we're climbing upon, but the other factors that come and interact with the rock at the surface really affect like one rock type can look and feel and climb very differently. And maybe only one thing is different, like the aspect. It'll be a completely different climbing experience, even if just one of these things changes. I don't see the stats that maybe some of the participants just entered in. There's probably a lot of climbers on this presentation. There's, maybe some have never climbed before. So just a very brief overview. There are a lot of different terms I'm going to use today, and I'm not going to go into detail on every single one of these, but I'll explain some. Most of what I do and is going and things that are going to be part of this presentation are trad climbing. Most of what I do is free climbing, which does not mean what you probably think it means if you're not a climber. Free climbing just means you're climbing the rock. You're not like yanking on the ropes or your gear to ascend. You're climbing protected by ropes, but you're not using the ropes to ascend. And so most of what I do is free climbing. In fact, I've never aided purposely. Sport climbing and bouldering. So free climbing, protected in trad, sport, and bouldering methods. I've done a lot of alpine climbing, and of course, this is greatly affected by geology as well, as is ice climbing, but those really won't be much of the presentation today, with the exception of the Tetons. Mixed could mean a lot of things, whether it's mixed rock and ice, or even perhaps mixed sport and trad. There are a few places where that occurs and is needed. At the very end, I'll address indoor gym climbing, just kind of for fun. And then also I'll talk about both of these single and multi-pitch types of ways of ascending a cliff. Finally, again, back to the term free, there's a lot of, I think, just misunderstanding of the term free climbing. Again, free climbing just means you're not pulling on the gear. Free soloing means you have no gear. Other than bouldering, which remains very low to the ground, I have not free soloed anything. And I think I have a picture of Alex Honnold in here, and that's about it. But gearless ascents are a little too risky for me. Just to briefly touch upon this for the non-climbers in the group, kind of an interesting little physics side note, top roping versus lead climbing. Really, these can happen, especially in single pitch settings in a lot of the places that I'm going to talk about. But top roping is when there's already a rope above you going through some form of anchor. And so if you fall, you really don't fall very far. You just pretty much land on the rope, which is a somewhat elastic rope. It flexes a little bit. It's dynamic. Lead climbing, you are clipping the rope into something as you go. And so if you have not clipped that rope into protection, whether it's a cam or a quick draw, and you're well above that point of protection, you risk a bigger fall. And so it puts greater force on the gear and the rope and you, and also the rock. And so when I talk about, I don't really talk much more about top roping versus lead. Most of what we do is a combination. But just wanted to put this diagram in there for the non-climbers. Similarly, I'm going to make some assumptions in that I think most of this audience is probably geologists or has a geological, at least basic geological knowledge. This diagram is up just to introduce really the way I'm going to structure this presentation. There's a lot of ways we could talk through the geology of climbing. Could be age of rock or geographical. I'm just going to go through and categorize some of my favorites by rock type. So I think igneous rock is first, then we'll showcase a few sedimentary rock places and then a few metamorphic rock places. Geologic time and its terms will also come up. If you're not a geologist, maybe pull up a time scale on another screen, or just sort of come back to this concept. I'll be referring to the ages of certain rock units. And so, yeah, you can have your rock scale in front of you. This is a fun one drawn up by some artistic geologists who have also published some cool books. I know this is too tiny to see. I'll try to find a way to link this image or turn it into a PDF that can get shared. But this is something a colleague of mine put together when she did a similar presentation. And it highlights, she put some of her favorite areas, a lot of which are the ones I'm going to be talking about, on a geologic timescale, kind of put it into context. Okay, so do I need to pause before I really dive in? Committee, is there any need to pause here?
No, I think we're good to go.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you haven't taken the Menti poll yet, I dropped it in the chat box if you want to tell us where you're from and about yourself.
Yes.
Great. Cool. Okay, so the igneous rock diagram, again, I'm going to not explain much about the diagram other than say, again, use that as an outline to say here are the main places that I'm going to talk about. We'll start with the intrusives, the batholiths, the perhaps most famous batholith of all in Yosemite, the Sierra Nevadas. Then we'll visit Devil's Tower here in my current home state and end up in Bishop and the Rio Grande Rift. So again, I've tried to put these in representative locations on the diagram for where the rocks may have formed. Okay, Yosemite. A disclaimer, I've only climbed in Yosemite twice, probably a total of maybe a week plus. It's really 2 climbing trips. And it's so I will not pretend to be the expert on Yosemite climbing nor its geology, but it's so iconic I had to start with it. And it also is just so deeply rooted in geologic history as well as climbing history that it's just, you can't not start with Yosemite. So the Sierra Nevada batholith was emplaced during the subduction along the western coast of what was then North America. So around 100 million years ago, really this is a range, but a late Cretaceous emplacement of a large batholith throughout the Sierra Nevada. Really, you want to think of it as multiple emplacements through a range of time. It wasn't just all of a sudden this monolithic uniform granite gets emplaced. One of the cool things about climbing is that you're up there touching the rock, you're interacting with the rock, and even climbing, you can climb through these boundaries between different batholiths, different emplacements, and see how they've interacted. Sort of a different view of the Western US context during the late Cretaceous, accretion of really the creation of the Western US. We'll come back to this time period several times during this presentation, I believe. Geologic map of Yosemite, really the valley and Tuolumne Meadows are mainly where I'm going to focus. The map is a little, actually I have several cool map views to show, but really the main rock units that I've climbed upon in Yosemite are the Half Dome granodiorite. It's a pretty uniform, typical like textbook granodiorite, literally. And then higher up in Tuolumne Meadows, I've climbed upon the Cathedral Peak granodiorite porphyry. And you can see the big potassium feldspars in this slab, but when they weather, it forms a really cool texture to climb up on. Again, this is El Capitan, huge amount of relief represented. I have only climbed one pitch of El Cap, purposely. We were just single pitch climbing. I've never done any of the big overnight or big ascents. I came across at GSA the geologic map, though, perhaps one of the coolest geologic maps, because it is of a vertical face, really showcasing the North American wall, which you can see in the rock as well as in the geologic map. But it's a fabulous map. I even have the physical one right here that I picked up at GSA. It's a really, really cool effort. Because why not? Why not map something vertical instead of just the bedrock from a top-down view? Really cool. And obviously this is to better understand the geologic history, the emplacements of the different batholith complexes here in Yosemite. I don't think it was really made for climbers. But from a high altitude, like without getting into like super details of every place that I'm going to mention, Yosemite climbing is characterized by the rock and the rock textures themselves, the weathering, the exfoliation that happens on, you know, when deep plutons like that are then exposed to the surface, pressure changes, weathering, this exfoliation, this scaling, almost like onion skin of the rock itself also creates a lot of the textures that we climb upon and the cracks that allow us to climb safely. And then glaciers, the whole valley is you look everywhere and you're seeing evidence of glaciers, not even, you know, not just the shape of the valley, but on the rocks themselves. As you approach or descend from different climbs, there's glacial polishing, there's all sorts of really cool striations and grooves all over the place. So a lot of factors affect how we climb in Yosemite. This is the one pitch that I've climbed on El Cap. We were, I think, intending to do a little bit more, but I think my husband got a neck injury like on this pitch, and we had to go to the chiropractor as like a little side visit during our climbing trip. But really, a lot of what we do with granodiorites in Yosemite, and really uniform rocks of any kind, uniform rocks tend to form cracks. And these cracks are what we use to ascend vertically. In the valley proper, the rock wouldn't, if the cracks weren't there, there wouldn't be a lot of, like, the climbing would be extremely difficult. The cracks form the features that we climb. And so I'll explain that in a second, but extremely uniform rock, cracks and dihedrals, like open book types of right angle types of setups. Those are the main climbable and protectable features. There's enough texture to smear your feet on, but especially if it's vertical, it becomes extremely difficult if you don't have a crack to use. So again, if you've never tried to climb a rock only using cracks, it's a technique that must be worked on. It really is, it's difficult. What you do with your hands, we just call it hand jamming. Sometimes it's just the width of your fingers, or even smaller, just your fingertips. Sometimes it's wider, and you can get your entire forearm in a crack or your entire body. Hand jamming, again, there's a lot of different techniques and ways to hold your hand to use the crack to climb. It's very hard on your hands. So I threw in a little diagram of some tape gloves. It's really like sort of the original way of getting up rock, because Yosemite was one of the original places where people free climbed and weren't just using gear. You can use cracks to do a layback where you're kind of have a right angle that's more in a dihedral. You can do that so your feet can press on one wall and you're leaning back. You're holding the crack with your fingertips or hands and providing pressure with your feet. You can stick your body in the entire chimney if it's a humongous crack. And then you're also doing the same thing with your feet. I couldn't find a toe jam diagram, but just sticking your feet creatively in cracks also provides a way for you to hold your body there. Alex Honnold is one of the masters of crack climbing, and this is a picture of him free soloing. I think this is the only picture I have of someone not using any gear whatsoever. So this is as pure as it gets, but it's also extremely risky, obviously. But when you are proficient at crack climbing, it feels like you could never fall out. Like if you're doing it well and it's a size that you've mastered, it's a really secure way of holding onto the rock. So Alex Honnold is not insane. He's just extremely skilled. For the rest of us, we use ropes and we, at least for traditional protection, for trad climbing of cracks, we put cans and hexes and nuts, gear, removable gear, into the cracks that we then clip the rope into as we ascend and pull it out as we descend or as the second person follows. So again, this isn't a whole tutorial on how to trad climb, but just a mention of how this particular type of rock is traditionally protected. Again, I try to use my own photos throughout this presentation. If they aren't my own photos, I've tried to credit the photographer, but this is me and my husband, Dave. This is probably 15 years ago now at this point. But just a few examples of some of the climbing we did in Yosemite. Some single pitch right from the ground and some multi-pitch, like the second picture here. I think we did 10 or so pitches that day up the cathedral spires. What we've become a little bit more, especially as I get older, is more of a single pitch sport climber. And so Tuolumne Meadows, if I go back to Yosemite, this is where I'll probably spend more of my time. Little less crack climbing, but a little more of the techie face climbing, which in Tuolumne is because of the porphyry. It's because of those potassium feldspars that are so large that when they weather, it's enough to climb even on a vertical or slightly overhanging face. Those crystals are enough. It's terrifying, but it's also, I like the technical aspect of it. So yeah, you're vertically climbing on these slabs or vertical faces, but there's no cracks, at least on some of these faces. There are cracks in Tuolumne Meadows, but on some of these technical faces, the way that it's protected is through bolts. So this is sport climbing. This is a type of climbing that I think I have a diagram next, where on a face, again, you're not using the crack, you're using the features on the rock itself for your hands and your feet. These pictures, by the way, these two are of Dave and I, but this is of the first female ascent of Peace. And I think I have another picture of it too. It's an extremely hard and terrifying climb put up by Ron Koch in, I think, the 80s. I'm not going to pretend to say that that's me. It's a very, very technical and difficult and poorly protected climb. Sport climbing though, really this is what I've done far more than trad at this point in my life. Rather than carry a bunch of different gear that you have to place properly in the right size, crack, sport climbing, what you carry on your harness are just a series of quick draws. And what is equipped on a route, you have to ascend where these exist, but there are bolts either drilled and held in place by expansion or held in place by glue, like the lower picture. But these bolts are in place. They're not very visible when nothing's hanging from them. But when you go up a sport climb, you clip your quick draw in to the bolt, and then you click your rope into the other side. And so when you're lead climbing and you do fall, you'll fall a ways, but you're not going to hit the ground. You're protected by this hardware that remains, the bolts themselves remain in the rock. As a side note, little tangent, bolting itself is geologically interesting. You have to be careful about where you drill these holes. They're not any more than sometimes 1.5 inches, 2 inches into the rock. But older bolting used hardware that wasn't stainless steel, so it's deeply rusted and corroded on the inside in certain climates. And even certain rock types like limestone and dolomite will corrode the bolt. And so there's been a lot of rebolting efforts in certain areas to use glue ends so that the metal and rock interface is protected by epoxy and it's not subject to as much corrosion. So it's kind of a cool side note with some of these places. There's Ron Koch on piece. Again, I forget how many bolts are in this pitch, but it's something like, there's a bolt every 50 feet or every 30 feet. So the falls that you risk are immense. Oh, good. So I'll pause. That was the end of the Yosemite section, and I'll pause here.
Hi, I think I'm going to jump in here. Yeah, we're going to take just a wee break. Thanks everybody for engaging in the chat. There's some really great banter coming in, Lauren. You'll have to check it out after the call. It's just a nonstop amazing discussion. So thanks everybody. Just a reminder too, we've been posting a Menti poll. We're super curious about where you're calling in from, your experience, what gets you excited about climbing and geology. So be sure to fill in your answers on that poll. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A there's a button on Zoom for putting in your questions as well. Yeah, so just a quick note on a couple of other Geology of events. If you're interested in learning more about how geology affects just about everything that we do, we've got 2 really exciting events coming up. Both of them have in-person components, which is great. It's a great way to meet people and spend time together and learn about geology. If you're at the Image Conference this late August, we're doing a Geology of coffee at a local cafe. So more information to come on that, but there'll be a registration opening up soon for that. And yeah, again, that'll happen at the end of August. And then the Geology of Rock and Roll, we're really excited about this event. This will be hybrid. So if you're not in the US and you want to tune in online, we are gonna run a Zoom component for that. But it's gonna be at the Red Rocks in Colorado, if I'm saying that right, which is a really amazing geological formation and spot. So we'll be running those. And again, they're co-hosted events with the AEPG Women's Network, the AWG Lone Star Chapter, and Midwest Geosciences Group. So yeah, keep an eye on our LinkedIn website, our LinkedIn page for AAPG and AWG and Midwest Geosciences, or sign up for our newsletters and you'll learn all about those. So I'll pass back to you, Lauren, unless anybody else from the team has anything to add, but
I
yes.
do. Oh
Yes, please.
There was a wait. This is Carla. There's a great question in the chat that you might want to address, or not in the chat, but on the Q&A right now.
Oh,
What
perfect.
is one pitch?
Huh.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a good question. I breezed over that in that intro slide. A pitch is basically half of a rope length that allows you to start and end back on the ground. And so like a single pitch, actually there's two ways to think about it. Like single pitch climbing is just you belay from the ground, the leader goes up half a rope length with enough so that they can get back to the ground when they're done with that climb. That's mainly what sport climbers do. Single pitch can also be thought of if you're going up a larger cliff. Let's say you're trying to ascend 1,000 feet. A rope length is typically 250 feet. Each pitch would be upwards of, let's say, 100 to 200 feet at a time as you go up. And that is part of multi-pitch climbing. But you still talk about like, oh, the second pitch, the fourth pitch. Does that help? Hopefully answer that question.
I think so. How long? So typically, how long is the rope? So when you say one pitch, then if it needs to be twice as long, typically how long is that?
Yeah, ropes are usually 60 to 70 meters. And so again, depending on whether you're trying to get back to the ground, like you're only going to climb 30 meters max or 35 meters if you have a 70-meter rope. If you're doing part of a bigger ascent, then you might, some pitches could be 200 feet, but you start to get rope drag and other complications if you're too far away from your partner. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll keep chugging along, and I'll try to make sure we have time for more questions at the end. But yeah, if there's anything, if members of the committee want to like yell at me if there's something that we can't pass by, then please do that. So in addition to areas that I'll spend more time highlighting, I had to throw in some of my favorites, like most uniques. So this was the most unique granite climbing I've ever done. It's a place in northern, like the very, very northern tip of the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean. The little island of Sardinia has it all. It has limestone climbing, it has basalt climbing, and then this little pocket of granite that is sculpted from what I am believing is seawater weathering of this granite and near constant wind. I've never seen rock scooped in such a way. And we only climbed there a day. It was Sardinia, but it was freezing. It actually snowed on us during that trip in Sardinia, but fun granite textures there. Thinnest granite fins, that award goes to the Needles of South Dakota, especially the picture on the left. That's a pretty classic climb that's right behind Mount Rushmore. And you get up towards the top and it's such a thin flake of granite that you're kind of worried to be on it. it sounds hollow. That one is protected by bolts, and you're also a little concerned about the bolts. Like, am I going to see this poking through the other side of this fin? But the Needles of South Dakota is also a classic granite area where you're climbing primarily either cracks or on the pegmatite, kind of pegmatite, but all the porphyritic texture. The big K feldspars are one of your main textures. Then I had to throw this one in. Lover's Leap, kind of near Lake Tahoe, California, is mainly known for its just some multi-pitch climbs on this cool cliff, but we could not pass this spot up, and we did several sport climbs where your only features are these veins that have weathered. They're more resistant to weathering than the rock around it, and some of the moves on these climbs were like an arm length between veins. And it was one of the most fun pitches I've ever done, just going up these really unique features. Okay, so that's it for granite. I think the whole presentation could be on granite climbing areas of the world, but got to move on to provide at least some variety. Devil's Tower is also an extremely unique place, both to visit and stare at. Culturally, it's very significant, and geologically, it's really cool. But climbing, it's one of the most unique places I've ever climbed. First of all, Devil's Tower is not basalt. The visitor center there does a great job of making that clear. This is not basalt. People look at the columnar jointing and I think the darkish rock and just make that assumption. But it's a cool rock, a phonolite porphyry, pretty fine grained porphyry compared to the stuff of Tuolumne Meadows. So you don't use the crystals to climb upon, but it provides a little texture. It's also likely that Devil's Tower is not the neck of a volcano. It's probably a laccolith that has eroded away, really only been exposed about 2 million years, even though it was intruded about 50 million years ago. And I think I tried to draw a diagram. It's the next slide. You know, the columns themselves, the geometry of the columnar jointing can tell you about the cooling rate. And they're narrower at the top. They're also, so Devil's Tower, the top third of it is more weathered. And you notice that visually from looking at pictures, but you also notice it climbing. Like the bottom is kind of rampy, but then that middle third, really, according to this picture, is like solid, beautiful columnar jointing. But then the top third gets kind of rotten. And so it's possible that erosion had paused, or perhaps uplift rates had changed. So the time of exposure, and these lines are meant to be the ground surface, something caused it to pause right there. So the upper third of Devil's Tower was exposed longer, and then the rest was exhumed. I'm sure there's been studies done now showing exhumation rates. But from a climber's perspective, it's interesting. You get into that top third and it really changes. So climbing on Devil's Tower is 100% trad. There might be a few bolts in place to make safer anchors nowadays, but you have these columnar joints that are curved near the bottom. And so you start out in these weird cracks or sort of dihedrals that are curved. And then you get into this is the view up. I don't know if you all can you see my cursor at all? So we climbed something called El Matador, which follows this stem box up. It's a pretty classic 510 or whatever. And so you're in this box, and this is what it looks like as you're looking up. Like, and for me, it was at the extent of what my legs and arms could reach. It's like reaching sideways out as far as I could with my legs and my arms. Luckily, Dave led this pitch because he could reach a little bit better. I had to just commit to one of the cracks, which became even more technical. But again, just very unique climb. You can get a view too here of our just traditional protection. We've put what look like mainly cams into this crack, choosing one side of the crack. Like if we zigzag back and forth, that would create a lot of rope drag, which becomes hard for the leader to keep pulling the rope up and moving upwards. And it's worth noting that on climbs like this, we're not both climbing at the same time. Dave, in this case, my husband, I belayed him until he went up to a safe anchor spot, and he established an anchor and then pulled the rope so that it was tight to me. And now I am climbing up. He's not pulling me up, although on this pitch he might have. But I'm climbing up. And so basically I'm top roping and pulling this gear out on my way up. So nothing gets left behind. So yeah, again, a lot of the other areas I'm going to talk through are shorter segments than Yosemite. But that was my tidbit about Devil's Tower. It is closed during, I believe, the month of June, because it also has a lot of traditional significance for the tribes in the area. You're not supposed to be on Devil's Tower, definitely not on the summit during those times when it's set apart. Okay, Bishop. We're still in igneous rock. Bishop is a fantastic place where I could also highlight several types of igneous rock. But I'm going to mainly talk about the Bishop Tuff. This is an ash violently erupted from the Long Valley caldera recently, geologically, so 760,000 years ago. The lower layers are more of an ash flow tuff, very a little more welded, and then the upper layers are more of the ash fall, less welded, and that also makes the climbing there have some variety. So it's, you know, not all tuff is the same. Not all of it climbs the same. You can see some columnar jointing even in the tuff members, and that's kind of that transition from the lower welded units into the less welded units up above. This is a view of the Owens River Gorge. And this is not the Long Valley caldera erupting, but just to give an idea of a pyroclastic eruption creating the ignimbrite flow, the super hot flow at the bottom, and then what eventually becomes the ash fall from the sky up above. So even in just two pictures, you can see variety in the tuff and the style of climbing that you would have to use to climb on this tuff. Kind of pancakey and slopey on the left, and then blocky and cracky on the right. All of this is sport climbing, even though you could probably trad climb in the cracks on the right. But really unique. It doesn't feel like ash. You know, a welded tuff is a pretty solid unit, but it's tricky to climb on because of this variety, I think. Now, higher up on the volcanic tablelands around Bishop, so not in the gorge, but on the top of the tablelands, faulting, it's actually a really cool active faulting zone. But faulting has kind of broken up the tablelands and allowed for these cool, huge boulders to just slightly detach from their original locations. And it's a world famous bouldering area. So bouldering doesn't involve any ropes. We put crash pads. You can see these little mattressy things on the ground. In essence, we put crash pads down on the ground to help catch falls or protect sharp other rocks. But usually there's other people around you to help spot you, like to help ensure a safe fall. Bouldering is kind of like free soloing in that it's really pure, you know, like you're just interacting with the rock itself. You're not fussing with gear or ropes. But it does have its dangers as well, because you can fall even from a few feet up. You can get hurt. But the bouldering in the volcanic tablelands feels very different. The rock is less welded. It feels more ashy. It weathers. You can see some plates, some really cool weathering plates on the right side of this boulder. It's pockety. It has, again, sort of these scoops from softer rock weathering away and eroding away once the weathering rind has been compromised. And so it's just really fun, creative rock. Every boulder's different. So pockets, plates, and crystals. I think this is the final igneous rock unit, but I had to talk about sort of where I learned how to climb. This is the Rio Grande Rift, northern New Mexico. And for the most part, there's kind of several things going on near Los Alamos, New Mexico. You have the Rio Grande Rift, but you also have the Jemez volcanic field. And so you have a sort of a lineament intersecting a rift, which creates all sorts of volcanism. So like in one place, Los Alamos is also somewhere where you could like highlight all of the different igneous rock types. There is a lot of tuff. There's a lot of welded tuff. There's rhyolite that you can climb on. But there's also this actually pretty, I don't want to say pure basalt, but it's a true basalt. And one of the only true basalts I've climbed on. But it's relatively young. It's actually the diagram is a little misleading. The basalts that you climb on along the Rio Grande Rift near Los Alamos are from a volcanic field called the Cerros del Rio. And so there are actual vents and mar eruptions and lava flows and sort of a mix of volcanism sources. It's not oozing out of rift faults. But the climbing is super unique. I love climbing down there. It's my hometown. So it's always fun to go home and climb on the stuff I learned on. But it's got everything. It's blocky. You can trad climb. It's pockety. You can sport climb. You can do all the above. Sometimes it's super steep. Sometimes it's vertical. I think it was a great place to learn how to climb because you get a lot of different techniques into one little spot. So sport and trad. Sometimes the pockets have zeolite crystals in them from secondary surface weathering, and so it's really fun to kind of be ascending. But I'm always thinking about geology as I'm climbing. It's a great climbing town to go hang out in. So that's it for igneous rocks. Again, this presentation is just scratching the surface of all the other, just kind of the highlights reel. And I wanted to keep things to places where I've personally climbed so I can provide little anecdotes about them. Unless anyone's opposed to it, I'm going to keep rolling.
Well, Lauren, let me pop in with a couple questions before you move on to sedimentary rocks that were in the Q&A and in the chat. So someone asked about it when you had the tablelands picture of the boulders. Was someone living under one of those boulders at one time? that was a question that came up.
Probably, but not to my awareness. I think you're just seeing the crash pads. I wasn't aware that anyone's home was under that boulder.
And then the other question was, is it more difficult to descend or ascend when doing bouldering?
That is a very good question because you can actually get yourself in trouble if you get up to the top of a pretty big boulder and if the descent is pretty technical. I think somewhere near one of these boulders, my husband actually, when we were still dating, we went to Bishop quite a few times when we were dating. He jumped off of a boulder thinking he could like make a safe landing of it, and he wrecked his ankle. So I think you have to scope the boulder out first to make sure there is a way down, or else you could really get in trouble.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll start journeying through some sedimentary rocks. And again, this diagram is mainly meant to introduce and just outline the places where we're going to head. Again, these choices are highly biased by my favorite places to climb. So Maple Canyon, Utah. And I've placed that in the tiny little alluvial fan on the diagram for a reason. We've got Indian Creek, Utah, which is in a dune sedimentary environment on purpose, a depositional environment. Potrero Chico in Mexico on a limestone platform. And then Wyoming dolomite also in a reef limestone platform type of setting. So Maple Canyon is possibly my favorite climbing area in the world, I think, other than where I live right now, with the Wyoming dolomite. It's a beautiful little pocket of crazy conglomerate. It's a cobble to boulder conglomerate. And some of the clasts are truly boulders. Like I've climbed past boulders 50 or 100 feet up that are a meter in diameter. Just, it's a crazy formation in and of itself. Geologically, I also like conglomerates because I think they obviously tell a lot of story about where they came from, what highlands they shed from. You're getting bits and pieces, like the ingredients of the mountains that they eroded from. I like conglomerates so much that my kitchen countertop is a conglomerate, and I still geek out over it, even a few years into having it. So this conglomerate is in central Utah, and it was shed off of the severe fold and thrust belt to its west. Really, it's a coarse alluvial fan deposit from the late Cretaceous. And again, these were sort of the severe fold and thrust belt was one of the pulses of Rocky Mountain formation in the Cordillera from Mexico to Canada, and then was paired with other types of mountain building slightly further east into Colorado and Wyoming. So anyway, these cobbles that were shed off of the severe fold and thrust belt are of mixed composition. Most of this is a class supported conglomerate. And the matrix is actually really sandy. Like some of it's kind of scary because the matrix is so soft. You could dig some of these cobbles out if you want, and yet you're climbing up 100 feet on them. It's definitely a good place to wear a helmet. Context, kind of an older diagram, but trying to show where in central Utah, in this paleogeographic image where we're talking about. So the highlands are to the west, kind of the opposite of how it is now in central Utah. The Salt Lake front, the highlands are, if you're in Salt Lake, the highlands are obviously to the east. But this conglomerate, there it is for geological timescale context. Kind of think of this type of environment. This again is not there. This is a Death Valley fan, I believe. But think of just huge coalescing alluvial fans along these mountain fronts, spitting out conglomerates really in this, like this proximal environment. That's where you get the really coarse boulder to conglomerate, boulder to cobble conglomerates. It climbs, it's so fun. Like you're climbing on the clasts themselves. Those are your handholds and your footholds. You're like crossing your fingers that they all stay put, because the bolts are also in those clasts. That's why it's a good thing that it's pretty well bolted. You have the benefit, or I guess it's unlikely that all of the clasts will fall out at once, so you'll probably remain pretty safe. But it tends to form pretty steep climbs, sometimes almost horizontal roofs of conglomerate. It's just crazy that it can hold these angles. It requires a lot of power and endurance. It's just really, because you're holding on to these clasts, these cobbles or boulders, it's really strenuous on your forearms. Not only because it's steep, it's just what we call pumpy. It makes your forearms extremely fatigued. And I think that's why I like it. It's such a fun, fitnessy kind of place to climb. It's not scary, it's just fun. Other than clasts perhaps falling out. So wear a helmet. Tried to capture some of these views. Again, this is a pretty steep cave. It's kind of hard to tell how steep it is in some of these photos. Maple Canyon is, again, I said it's in central Utah. It's near Ephraim and Nephi. It's worth a visit geologically. Like, even if you're not a climber, it's a beautiful place to birdwatch. It's a beautiful place to hike. It's a state park. It's just such a unique little landscape where there's hundreds of little micro canyons where you can explore. Anyway, love it. Got to get my reservations for this summer there. I grew up near a conglomerate. This is in northern New Mexico. Really kind of the first sport climbing on a conglomerate that I ever did. This is El Rito, New Mexico. It is, I used to think it was a super old, I thought it was a metamorphic, like a metaconglomerate, based on how it looks in that right picture. Unlike Maple at El Rito, the cliff, the clasts are broken through. The matrix is a lot harder, and the quartzite clasts and the matrix seem to have a similar hardness. So I always thought it was a metaconglomerate that might be Precambrian, but it is actually just along a fault zone where the faults hardened the material, hardened the matrix. And so it also forms a really fun place to climb. And when I was working at Fort Lewis, one of the undergrads, I worked with her on a study of clast provenance. And so we did some vertical studies. We roped up, and she's in this picture doing like a vertical transect, measuring a sampling of clast sizes and compositions along the climb. So, okay, we're decreasing in grain size as we go here. So this is the cover shot for this presentation, which is in Indian Creek, Utah. This is also a place I really haven't climbed in quite a while, just sort of cut my teeth, learned a lot of trad skills there, but now it's been a while. Indian Creek is composed of Wingate sandstone, early Jurassic, dune sand that was sometimes on the shore of a larger body of water, sometimes more of a truly deserty dune. The cross bedding of the sandstone, the iron content of it indicate that it was subaerial. It's a really it's part of a huge sequence and complex of these enormous dune sandstones in the western US. And you wouldn't think that it would climb well. Like, usually sandstones, often sandstones are too gritty, maybe a little too, like someone mentioned Garden of the Gods as I was putting this presentation together. Garden of the Gods near Colorado Springs. That is a terrifying sandstone to climb on because it's sandy. And so it really takes special conditions to allow sandstone to be fun to climb on. And the Wingate got those conditions. It's very fine grained. And so first of all, it's very compact. It's well sorted, very uniform. This is a picture where you can see these beautiful conchoidal fracture patterns showing just that uniformity. You don't see that unless something's pretty uniform and hard. It is undercut. It lies upon the Chinle Formation. And so in a lot of cases, it's undercut because of erosion, which also leads to some of this fracture formation and the crack formation that I'll talk more about. And so these splitter cracks form, and they're pretty unique to the Wingate sandstone near Moab, Utah. And so this is also a world-class place where people go for the skills in and of themselves, and also to gain the skills to climb on bigger places like Yosemite and other alpine areas. You also have desert varnish. That's an attempt at a photomicrograph of desert varnish, which does help make the Wingate sandstone climbable. It helps protect the sandstone when the varnish is compromised, which you're starting to see from a lot more climbing. The rock is softer underneath and it does start to weather faster. So in certain places, climbing is actually, I don't want to say destroying, but it's accelerating weathering and processes, geologic processes on these cliffs. But this is a classic splitter finger to hand crack. This is Dave, where he's putting in, we're back to trad gear. So he's putting in cams as he goes and clipping the rope in. So if he falls, the rope catches him as long as the cam stays in the rock. Sandstones are tricky though. Again, it's not a hard rock, and you have to be careful with rain or certain seasons. If a sandstone is saturated with water, like you're really not supposed to climb trad in sandstone areas within like 24 to 48 hours after it rains. Because if that rock is saturated and Dave falls, the climber falls, certain cam placements could fracture out a whole dinner plate of rock. I've seen it done. I've done it myself. So you actually have to be careful and respect the rock that you're in and understand the rock. That saturation makes it weaker. But yeah,
we've got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, splitter cracks are painful. They're fun. They're also unique. Dihedrals, same principles, but slightly different body positions. Sticking your hands and your feet and your cams into these cracks for protection. And sometimes you have to move laterally between cracks to keep going. The area around Moab is subject to a lot of cool tectonics, and that is, it's not just the undercutting by shale, it's also these regional arching from salt tectonics and collapse, and there are regional fracture patterns that you can see some of these. It affects how certain climbing areas get exposed. You can see some of the undercutting here, the Chinle Formation underneath the Wingate sandstone. And sometimes you find really cool footprints. This is in the Chinle, but it was right at the base of one of the climbs. That was pretty cool. I don't know what it is. Triassic reptile. Okay, I'll speed up a little bit. I love climbing on limestone. Again, I could do a whole presentation on limestone climbing. This is a really unique place in northern Mexico called El Potrero Chico. It is, what you're looking at are vertical beds of limestone. In the I don't know how to pronounce it, Coahuila fold and thrust belt. So we're in the Sierra Madre Oriental. Like, envision a tablecloth getting pushed on a table and just crumpled. Really, you have limestone on top of gypsums and other salts that provide a perfect layer for that fold and thrust belt action to occur, that crumpling of the crust. So from a climbing perspective, this limestone is fabulous. It is called the Cupido limestone, another Cretaceous unit. And the fact that there are evaporites underneath the limestones, again, helped to make it so that it was more crumpleable, and also make for the topography that you see. Like, it's called El Potrero Chico because it's in this cool eroded out corral. You know, it's multiple miles in diameter, but it's a little corral. And on the inside, there's all sorts of cool gypsum crystals mixed with cool cactus. Just a really neat area. But yeah, we're kind of here in its depositional environment, that breakup of Pangea shelf environment for limestones. And they're in time, early Cretaceous. But because you're climbing on this limestone, like limestone is, you're climbing on these vertical planes. Sometimes it's kind of slabby, sometimes it's overhanging. But for the most part, this is sport climbing. So it's protected by bolts. It's a very uniform, dense limestone that weathers in a lot of really cool patterns because it's somewhat dissolvable. And you get a lot of vegetation. It's one of the places where you're working through some cactus on these multi-pitch climbs. So it's very adventurous. Its twin, very nearby, is a place called El Salto. And really it's the same limestone. Similar, so El Potrero Chico was up in this little corral up here. If you can see my mouse moving around. And so El Salto is very nearby. It's called the Jump because there's a waterfall in this canyon. But here, it's one of the closest places where you can climb on tufas. And so very unique. There's only a few places in the world that really have good climbing tufas, but this is a depositional feature, like in a cave, but subaerial, where it's from rainwater interacting with CO2, forming acids that then dissolve and then evaporate and leave behind these essentially stalactites and dripstones on the sides of these cliffs. And they're strong enough to climb on and bolt and form really fun features to climb. This one's in a cave at El Salto, and I'm not only climbing near these stalactites, but I climbed up into a hole up into the cave. It was a very, very unique climb. Other places I've climbed on tufas, Mediterranean limestone does form tufas. It actually takes a pure limestone to form a tufa. Dolomites don't do this. So this is in Slovenia near Osp, a place called Misjapec. Very cool, like karst collapse feature. We're climbing in this horseshoe. So it's steep on all sides, but you can chase the shade. It's kind of a very, very, very cool place to climb. But really Slovenia, this limestone is part of the original karst plateau, like where the term came from. Very nearby in Croatia, this cliff is probably 2,000 feet high, and it's all bolted limestone. It's like a sport climber's paradise on limestone. And it's a national park that like loves climbers. It's catered to climbers. Climbed a few fun pitches here. The grooves on the left. That's not a picture of us, but we climbed into those grooves, and they were like body-wide dissolution features in this limestone, and you had to just ooch through the dissolution scoops and then get onto the scary slab up above. It was, again, very unique. Okay, final little bit here, nearing the finish line. The Bighorn Dolomite is one of the reasons why I moved to Wyoming, in addition to Brunton. I love climbing on the Bighorn Dolomite. It's a fabulous rock. This is a picture of me in Ten Sleep Canyon with a cliff line that is almost all climbable in the background. The purple blobs are the exposed areas of the Bighorn Dolomite in Wyoming. So there's a lot of it in the Bighorns, especially Ten Sleep. And then there's a lot of it right here along what we call the Lander Front and Wild Iris curving down here along South Pass. Most climbers around here think that they're climbing on limestone. So I've given this presentation catered largely to just this rock type here at the Climbers Festival in Lander, because most people, you know, there's a competition called the Limestone Rodeo. It's like, I hate to break it to you guys, but this is not limestone. It's a dolomite. It's it's an Ordovician dolomite. And so what that means is that it's an altered limestone. It might have started out in a similar environment, like in a shallow marine environment. It might have even started out as a true limestone, but it was altered. The calcium was replaced by magnesium, at least partially, and it drastically changes the texture of the rock, not only for interesting geological things like oil and gas. You know, it increases the permeability, the porosity of the rock, but it drastically changes how it weathers and how you climb upon it. And so, little snapshot of Wyoming during the Ordovician. It's a place where you could go snorkel and scuba dive among strange sea creatures, for sure. It was also an interesting time, and you can see these cyclical layers, these pretty regular layers in certain spots of the exposures of the Bighorn Dolomite. It was also a time of a lot of cyclical climate change, lots of sea level rise and fall. And so in the Bighorn Dolomite, you have these like regular layers of chert-rich lenses alternating with just regular dolomite. So that in and of itself is interesting geologically and also to climb up on. There's cool fossils. I'm always geeking out about what I'm climbing next to, like yelling down to Dave, hey, I think this is a rugose, you know, or this is a receptaculites. Yeah, there's just wonderful things to look at as you climb. Corals, you know, the constant reminder that, yeah, I'm climbing on bits of Ordovician coral reef here. Anyway, from a climbing perspective, the main features that the Bighorn Dolomite forms are actually from differential weathering between the more dolomitized and the less dolomitized zones. Like you can walk up to certain sections of rock that are pretty fresh, and you can see more gray swaths and more pink swaths. And then you can actually walk further and see how it weathers. And like the gray swaths tend to be harder, and the pink swaths are the ones that have weathered away or dissolved away. So it's a really cool combination. I think a lot of people think this is bioturbation, and sometimes it is. That's the problem. But most of the texture that we climb on is not bioturbation. It's a dolomite, like a dolomite differential weathering feature. And I honestly don't know if there's a technical term. I hope someone on this presentation can tell me the technical term for it. Anyway, sometimes you're climbing on pockets that were dissolved away from fossils or from calcite vugs that dissolved away or maybe still have some calcite in them. But it tends to form very fun sport climbing. You're mostly sticking your fingers and hands into these pockets. It's pretty technical and hard on your fingers and sometimes sharp, but it can form. It's just very athletic. It's not all this steep, but it's just really fun, athletic, and yet still pretty technical climbing. And that's all, you know, right here in my backyard. One of the reasons I live here. Okay, the finish line. This section's short because I actually have climbed on very little metamorphic rock because it does not weather well. And so from a rock climbing perspective, and this is also just limited by my experiences, I just have not personally climbed upon great metamorphic rock. So the two places I'm going to mention, one is really the only alpine example, climbing in the Tetons here in Wyoming. You're mainly in a nice, almost migmatite sort of facies, and so really amphibolite. And then a little place called Ibex. I actually took out some places that I thought were metamorphic, but actually are just sandstones. So these are the final two places. Okay, so the Tetons, classic, national park, beautiful, like most dramatic mountain front in the US, but geologically also really cool. Even just day hiking in the Tetons, you'll see rocks and boulders that just have these amazing migmatite or pegmatite textures. Really, the Teton Range itself has old rocks, but the range is young and the uplift is even younger. This is an extensional mountain range. Really a basin and range extension mountain range. When, this is the view from the highway, you're looking at 7,000 feet of vertical relief. Dave and I we summited the Grand. This is now over 10 years ago. But for some sick reason, we did it in a day. It was a very tiring day. So like valley to summit, back to valley in one long day. And I don't know if I would want to do that again. I'll take my time next time. But we've done a lot of rock climbing. There's some fun like multi-pitch climbing in the valleys around the Tetons in the same rock. And then we've also, like the climb we did on the Grand was a rock climb. We did the Exum Ridge. And in this case, for speed's sake, we simul-climbed. So we were still roped up and putting protection in, but both were moving at the same time. And that's on the summit. We took other summit pictures, but this is my geology summit picture. You can see some cool, nice and migmatite textures right there on the summit. I was like geeking out because there's humongous garnets. There's beautiful pyramids of mica. I had never seen mica grow in these triangular pyramids. So Dave almost couldn't get me off the summit. I was like, it was amazing. Just beautiful, beautiful geology up there. Final spot, worth mentioning, is a pretty fringe spot, but unique rock and a unique setting. This is a place called Ibex. It's in western Utah. This doesn't show state boundaries well, but as geologists, that's even better. Those are fake boundaries. Anyway, it's western Utah, very much in the Basin and Range province, and a place where there's a quartzite cliff band that has been eroded enough that some of these big blocks have fallen off of it. And so it's a bouldering location primarily. And it's in a playa lake bed. So you're in this stark landscape of just this white lake bed all around you that you have driven across to get there. And yeah, it's called the Eureka quartzite. It's a very pure quartzite. And I learned something by doing this presentation because I had thought it was a marble when I was climbing on it. It had a sugary texture, but it's such a pure marine beach sandstone that really is just like slightly metamorphosed just through burial. So I think it classifies as a quartzite, but it's believed to be the most pure quartzite in the world, I believe. Whatever that means. I think it's just compositionally pure quartz. So anyway, it's fun bouldering. It's very unique, and the whole time I thought it was marble because it was sort of a white sugary rock that just in all my experiences, I was convinced I was climbing on marble. But by putting this presentation together, I learned it was not. Okay. I can't finish without mentioning the chalk that you all received or maybe are about to receive. if you signed up for that link, the block of black diamond, white gold chalk. It is geological, so it's kind of a fun little note that what we use on our hands, just like gymnasts or weightlifters, climbers put chalk on their hands to increase the friction with the rock. Chalk is magnesium carbonate. It's not calcium carbonate, it's magnesium carbonate. And sometimes there's other additives, but I think the best chalk is just the pure stuff. And the reason we use it, it's chosen for a lot of different athletes, is because it's insoluble. It keeps your hands dry, and therefore it improves your grip and your staying power on the holds. And there's been all sorts of cool studies done actually trying to scientifically analyze the effect of chalk versus no chalk on certain types of holds. And it's like scientifically proven to help. So for whatever that's worth, it is mined for the most part. It's mined from magnesite, dolomite, all over the world. I think there's some efforts at like deriving it in a more environmentally friendly way, through just the creation and the heating of various salts. And so I guess you could say you could get it from seawater as well. And then a little nod to the gym climbers. Climbing's becoming a lot more accessible, largely because of gyms around the world. And I love climbing outside, but I also love climbing in gyms. All the traveling I do for Brunton, I always take my climbing shoes and visit climbing gyms of the world. And I think it's really fun. You get to interact with people, fellow climbers around the world, and also just stay in shape. But yeah, climbing holds are made of plastic and rosin, and but they're really meant to mimic real holds. Sometimes there's entire series that are like the Maple Canyon series, where it's all blobby conglomerates. Sometimes gyms have cracks, so you can practice your skills. And then this is a tufa, a synthetic tufa to practice that. So yeah, even the fake, the indoor climbing is trying to mimic the geology that I've touched upon today. So that is it for my slides.
That was epic. Lauren, you were such a good speaker, and you have such good photos from angles that I will never be able to achieve taking a photo from, because I can't climb up that high. I'm now inspired to increase my upper body strength for sure. I know climbing is so good for upper body strength and balance.
Yes.
If our participants would jump on the Menti poll, because we do want to know what other geology of seminars and webinars you would like to hear. That's how we got this topic, the geology of rock climbing, because it was a suggested topic by an attendee previously. Thank you to Lauren. You have some questions. I'm going to share the Menti poll results while you answer some questions.
Okay.
We definitely had a few good questions here. Let me take over control.
Let me know if I need to do anything.
I think we're just going to read you the questions.
Okay, I can read some of them.
Thank you.
There were quite a few questions that were related to differential weathering. So here's a few. How well indurated or cemented are those fan deposits? So I think that was the conglomerates. Yeah. And you kind of answered it, and there were a couple different ones, but just give your take, I guess.
Yeah, so the Maple Canyon fan deposits are not well indurated. The matrix is literally sand. And it's just, I think they are so, again, it's class supported. And so it's literally the class that are supporting those angles with sandy bits in between. And it's sometimes the matrix has entirely fallen out, and you can see through and around the cobbles. So I imagine there's some cementation just through the act of compaction and cementation that's holding those clasts together. But the matrix sure isn't helping much. That's my observation of Maple Canyon.
And then another question asked, which crystals will weather first, mafic versus felsic? And then also in size, small versus large. So someone had asked about finer crystalline rocks versus the porphyries that had bigger crystals. And then another one was mafic versus felsic.
Yeah. Let's see if I can answer that in a pretty concise way. I mean, I think with porphyries, it does depend. You tend to get, in my experience, the only useful crystals I've climbed upon are the feldspars. The more mafic minerals, if they are present, they don't have the structure, and they also do weather faster than the more felsic components. So like, I've never like grabbed an amphibole and used that as a handhold or foothold. It's just it geometrically and also just in terms of weathering, they're not the things that stick out. I think the exception being maybe on the Tetons, where those weird pyramids of mica were actually sticking out enough that I remember like smearing on mica, being like, oh, I've never done this before. This is weird. Because it's usually the first thing to weather away. Does that help?
I hope so. These are questions that were put in the Q&A. Yeah. And then I found this funny, especially when you were talking about was one of the places in Mexico where you're kind of going into a hole. But someone asked, do you ever encounter critters while sticking your hands into cracks?
Yes. Often there's especially in cracks or in larger pockets or in caves like that, there will be like nesting bats, or sometimes cliff swallows. So like birds are nesting, or even just sometimes regular, not cliff swallows or bats, but sometimes just bigger pockets. A bird has built a nest in a pocket. And so climbers are generally pretty eco-conscious. And if there is a nesting bird, we'll put a little sign at the bottom, or like people will tag the first bolt as a way of saying like, hey, don't climb here. If there's like a more sensitive bird species, like a falcon, there'll be like a width of cliff that's closed while they're nesting, because they kind of get testy if you're near them.
Hey,
but yeah, the weirdest thing I think was, I was convinced by some friends when I was really young to climb at night, like by moonlight. And I stuck my hand in a hole and a bat flew out, and I freaked out and luckily was just top roping, because it actually flew out.
Hey, Lauren, I was going to mention that Alex Honnold, someone took a little story he told about, I think it was bats in a crack. Somebody took the story and turned it into a cartoon, little 30-second cartoon of him describing these bats flying out. So if I'll find it, I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Yes.
But made me think of it. Yeah.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
And then next one is going to be maybe bad geology movies, and we'll talk about Dante's Peak, quite possibly. Oh. Thanks everyone for joining. Reminder, you can share the talk. It will be posted on the YouTube channel. So if anyone missed it that you think would be interested, you can go ahead and send them the link. It will be open access. If you want to stay on and ask any more questions, Lauren, if you've got a few minutes, everyone, you're welcome to unmute, chat with Lauren, ask her some questions about Brunton or about her favorite rock spots.
Chris, are you going to put the Menti results up? The Menti results, or no?
Am I not sharing them? It says I'm screen sharing.
I just see the questions, but not the results.
I can stop.
Ah, there we go. Well,
sorry. Yeah. I was taking control too much. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So we've got some people that they're going to be into it.
Nice.
Into climbing in the future. We had a really good global representation, which is really awesome.
Nice.
Oh, hey,
That's neat.
we've got a question here in the chat from Ashley, Lauren. She asks, what were the areas called in Slovenia and Croatia that you mentioned?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's been a while. So that big national park, like the limestone Yosemite in Croatia is Paklenica. And Croatia is full of climbing. We also climbed at an island called Hvar. It's Hvar. But I think the surface we climbed on at Hvar was like literally a tectonic boundary, is like this huge breccia, limestone breccia. But yeah, there's several other places we climbed in Croatia. But Paklenica is what I pictured here today. And then in Slovenia, that was called Misja Peć, and it was near the town of Osp. Really like very southern Slovenia, very close to Italy. Yeah, I'm looking at the comments now too, the chat. VAR has some deep water soloing. I was too afraid to do it. The water was cold.
Okay, if there's no other questions and nobody wants to chat, we can end it here.
All right. Well, great.
Thanks
Thanks
again,
for the
Lauren.
opportunity. Thank you, committee, for organizing this.
Everyone go order a Brunton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, post the link in the chat, Lauren. Post the link.
Oh, just Brunton.com.
Brunton.com.
Easy to
There we
remember.
go.
We have a sale going on right now. 20% off.
Nice. Well,
Very
hey,
nice.
hey, before we go, I noticed
Mhm.
Jenna posted this this question, and she also posted it in the Q&A, and it's a great one to end on, maybe. How do you mentally and physically prepare yourself before you climb and be comfortable with climbing outdoors? I think that's a great way to finish up.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, a lot of people, especially nowadays, might first experience climbing in a gym, and that's a great like way to get in shape and even work on your mental fortitude, because you can lead climb in gyms too, and I think gym climbing is fantastic. But I think especially as you transition outside, or if you're starting to learn to climb outside, like climbing is such a unique sport because it is mental. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual. And it's a great, you're constantly problem solving. It's in that aspect, it's mental because you're having to think. For me, I think a combination of getting and staying in shape, like it does take a certain ramp up period where you do have to, and that's where gyms are great, but you can do it outside. But I do a lot of bouldering to stay in shape, because it does keep your hands and forearms and really your whole upper body. It keeps you very strong, keeps your core strong. That way, when I do have time to climb outside, more than an hour a day, I at least have a base that I can work off of, and have that base and have fun on climbs that are longer and difficult, or just fun. The mental side of it is something that's different for everybody. I think especially females versus males, we deal with the mental aspect of climbing and the fear very differently. But I think that it takes getting used to. But I also have found that you have to just block everything else out. And it's, for me, climbing is the one time in my life where I'm the most present. Because even if even if there's chaos down below on the ground, or if it's busy or a zoo, I block it all out, and it's just me and the rock and the movement. And so that's sort of my set of strategies.
All around good life advice. Okay, well, I think we're gonna round it out. I think that you know, we could stay on and chat for a really long time, and we certainly do sometimes with these Geology Hub events, but we had excellent attendance today. That was an amazing talk, Lauren. People are really excited. We're excited to go through the chat afterwards too and pull out all the notes and anecdotes. But yeah, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Thanks for putting together such a comprehensive presentation and you know, delivering it and bringing all the hype. Lots of prep goes into these events, and we love feedback. So if anybody has suggestions, please feel free to reach out. And yeah, I want to thank, we had a couple of folks on the call who helped organize everything. So thanks to Carla, Stefano. We had Rebecca, Dan, who couldn't make it today, Chris, you guys met earlier. I think that's everyone. But yeah, so thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, I think we'll just round it out at that. And I'm wishing everybody a lovely weekend. Any parting words, Lauren? Anything you want to leave anybody with
No, I just encourage you to give it a try. Again, even if it feels inaccessible for some reason or another, climbing's great for everyone. So yeah, just maybe this has inspired you to get out there and give it a try.
Awesome.
Have a good weekend.
Say thanks to our sponsors too, because
oh my goodness, yes.
CPG Women's Network, AWG, Lone Star, and Midwest Geosciences, especially Dan for sending out the chalk to the people that ordered it. It was really cool to get that.
Yeah, and stay tuned for our future events. And like I said, if you're going to be in Colorado or Houston, definitely come out to the Geology of Coffee and the Geology of Rock and Roll. So thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate everything. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lauren.